previously been seen as a structuring dualism, teaching and research. And notably absent from the 1998 report, of course, are the two dualisms that structure Boyer 2030. Equity and excellence on the one hand, and access and success on the other. I would go so far as to say that the rebalancing of teaching and research at research universities has been a good deal more than cosmetic in the intervening 30 years. The rise of institutions such as UERU, the significant increase in the numbers of teaching and learning centers, and the enhanced attention to evidence-based teaching practices at research universities has certainly significantly drawn attention to the importance of improving teaching, especially in STEM fields. Teaching is valued more than it was previously at research universities, and significant work has been done on improving both evaluation and the valuation of teaching. But the broadening of access, and especially the advent of so-called minority-serving research universities, such as my own, has drawn ever greater attention to the question of student success and equity. The movement for educational accountability and even performance-based funding models have highlighted the degree to which our institutions continue to fail large numbers of admitted and enrolled students, especially low-income, underrepresented group and first-generation students, the group we call new generation students in the University of California system. Underlying these failures has been a complex and often dispiriting debate about the value of equity, about which responsibilities institutions can be said to have to their students, and I would note to their employees. And this is also something that comes up in both of the Boyer reports, inequitable reward systems for faculty at public institutions in particular. Were these debates still not lively, the Boyer 2030 report would not have to argue so vigorously for its primary formula, deemed the equity excellence imperative, and those of you who know it by heart are welcome to sing along, that excellence without equity, privilege reproducing privilege, is not true excellence, and equity mere access without excellence is unfulfilled promise. Given the events of the past week, we can only imagine that the need to make the case for the equity excellence imperative will only increase in the next 4+ years. To put this another way, when Boyer 2030 posed the fundamental question, how can US research universities embrace the equity excellence imperative? I think they were primarily asking a question about whether, in general, we had the will to walk our talk in a landscape that still prioritizes research over teaching. For me, at least, this question has become much more pragmatic and less idealistic in the last 7 days. How, which practices exactly will be available to us in an increasingly constrained landscape in higher education, especially public higher education, to make good on our commitment to equity for both students and employees? What needles will we be asked to thread for the foreseeable future when it comes to ensuring the success of our new generation students and unleashing the potential they bring to the university and the world? And how willing are we to work diligently, creatively, and fearlessly to not squander their excellence while not exploiting the ever-growing numbers of contingent, precarious, or as Adriana Kizar calls them, vital faculty who work at our institutions? And I think my colleagues will speak a little bit about this issue in other places. Our panelists agreed well in advance to a few questions relevant to the Boyer 2030 report in their national contexts in Britain, Canada, and Australia, but they won't be working through these questions, systematically in order, and we will leave time for questions afterwards. So these questions are: where is Boyer particularly relevant in your context? Where does it fail to resonate in your national context? And what are the stress points where you sit in centering equity as excellence? So with that, I will hand it over to Angela Palladino from the University of Melbourne.
Thanks, Jody. Now, if I stay here, can you still hear me on that mic and online? A thumbs up for anyone online?
Yes.
Thank you. Wow, that was loud. Okay, thank you, Tina. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Palladino. I'm the Deputy Vice President of Academic Board at the University of Melbourne. So I'm looking after the Senate there. I'm also a founding director of a Centre for Professional Development in the Faculty of Business and Economics, and I'm also a professor of marketing, so teaching undergraduate students in their hundreds at the university. So a few hats, and I thought what I'll do today is walk you through some of the issues, or all of the issues, I think, from the Boyer report that really resonate with us at the university, and what the university, the country in terms of the government, and also the context of the sector are doing to try and address some of the challenges from the Boyer report. So as highlighted in the report, we're facing all of those challenges that have been highlighted quite succinctly in the report, from really trying to reconcile these deeply entrenched inequities that we find in higher education. And I should note, the University of Melbourne is a group of 8 university, which is a sandstone university, kind of like the Ivy League in the United States. Probably not as well-resourced as those, but we're public institutions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Am I admitting people?
No, someone else is admitting people, I hope.
I am. Okay, thank you. So all of these issues are really facing us all at the same time, and we're facing this confluence of issues that we're having to deal with as a sector in the university. So we know from COVID that we were able to respond quite quickly and efficiently to change. We also know that our staff or our faculty are very fatigued, and we're facing quite a number of challenges that we need to face as a collective to be able to draw more equity for our students and our academics. Why isn't that moving? Thank you. Okay, some context for you for Australia. So the government in Australia has very little to do with our funding. So we're having cuts to funding annually, but they have a lot to do with the regulation of Australia. So recently we've had a large review of the tertiary education sector in Australia, and we are in a constant state of flux, and it's defined by reductions in government funding, caps to international students. So by way of background, our international students are more than 50% of our student population, so quite a significant amount. And we're facing increase in regulation and oversight, and more commissions being placed to provide that oversight for the university. The Accord is the report that was derived by the Australian government, basically trying to address a lot of the things that are raised in the Boyer report. So trying to provide better pathways for our students, trying to increase access and affordability for our students, trying to increase the domestic growth of our domestic market, which has been in decline for a number of years, not in increase. And also to think about new qualifications and looking at articulation pathways a little more clearly. So the challenge has been on focusing on structural reforms and also addressing academic integrity challenges at the same time, and really looking at how the sector as a whole can work together to provide more equitable pathways for our students. And the particular focus of the government has been on low socioeconomic background students, which reside in our areas of poverty in Australia. And it's a challenge because in our research-focused environments, we have people really trying to focus on their expertise of research, not necessarily the expertise of teaching. So to address some of those challenges, we've had changes to academic work categories, which I've heard has happened here in North America as well. So we've seen an exponential growth in education-focused staff, so people specialising in teaching, challenging to measure the outcomes for this group of staff, and also to reward teaching excellence. We're constantly in an environment of people not finding time for professional development to improve teaching, and we seem to be in this cycle of not really addressing the issues that we face. And of course, this is all in the context of wellbeing challenges for our staff. At the university, we've had a brand new strategic focus. It's called the Academic Advancing Students and Education Strategy. And there is a lot to achieve in this strategy over the next 5 years. It seeks to unite careers, professions and curriculum for our staff and our students, engage in significant assessment reforms so we can engage our students more, but also to address the different learning needs for our students coming from different backgrounds. And this is in a context where assessment tends to be really designed on 100% exams or 80% exams. So that weighting of assessment has contributed to the wellbeing issues and also success rates for students who are coming from our lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So behind a lot of these initiatives is how do we make education more equitable for our students and to allow them to succeed. We've also tried to incorporate the student voice and amplify that much more succinctly, transform student selection, which has been another contributor to the students that come into the university in the first place and how we support those students. And attracting students from diverse backgrounds really is dependent on those changes being made. When I went through the Boyer report and looked at the provocations, I thought, which ones resonated with us the most? And I thought I'd asterisk the ones that I thought were relevant. And they were all relevant. And I'm not going to stand and talk through every single point, but I thought I'd at least go through at least a few of them to highlight a few areas. This one was the one that resonated the most with the institution and the sector, this world readiness and education for life. And we're finding that it's the government pushing the university sector to make these changes. So whether the university would like to do it or not, they're being forced to do it with regulation and oversight. So the government is actually focusing on how we prepare our domestic market for the skills of the future and careers of the future, and how can we increase education access to more students across Australia through curriculum reforms and student selection reforms and articulation of degrees and reforms to those. So really, how do we get students from all parts of Australia, not just the privileged areas, to be exposed to higher education, have the opportunities afforded by higher education so we can solve the world's wicked problems? So we've also seen that there's been a reduction in students studying humanities and a big influence on people studying STEM and the importance of STEM relative to humanities. But at the same time, we're finding that our people that are exiting into the workforce are more challenged when it comes to ethical decision-making, critical thinking skills, very important problem-solving skills that we need. So perhaps that needs to be rebalanced. So we're finding this constant challenge of engaging our students in a breadth of education. So we have breadth as an important facet of our teaching. Freedom of speech is constantly being compromised and constantly being challenged for us. And we're trying to make sure that we strike a balance between equality and community and safety on campus. So many of you would have seen lots of campus encampments happening across the university sector worldwide. We were no different. But really finding in our current political environment, what is that balance that we need to strike so our students feel that they can express ideas, as well as making sure that they feel that they can trust the institution. Moving to teaching with evidence-based pedagogies, I think this is another area we find a particular challenge. And here what we're finding is in a research-intensive institution, the focus tends to be on growing expertise and depth of expertise for our research faculty. And now we're changing our categories of work focus. And we have quite a lot of people who are coming in and being recruited as our education-focused staff. So we have a big challenge on how to develop careers that are equally important for our staff. I should say our academics. They're still classified as academics for us. And how do we make sure that they have a rewarding experience, that they're providing our students with rewarding experiences, and that they're elevating teaching excellence across the institution? So it's always been a particular challenge at a research institution. And we're also making sure that we're changing our hiring practices. So we're now looking for elements of teaching excellence in the faculty that we recruit, regardless of whether they're research-focused staff, research and teaching staff, or education-focused staff. Advising is something new to us at the university. I know it's well established here in North America, but for us, it's very new, and academics have been asked to take on an advising role. And here we're trying to make sure that our academics are able to advise our students correctly on career paths without necessarily always having the same career development or staff development needed to do that. But we do know that academic advising is linked with student success. It does help our students from lower social academic backgrounds to feel connected with the university. So we know that's important. And also thinking about how do we use technology to scale up. Faculty rewards has also been changed by our Fair Work Commission. So another regulator in Australia, we have many of them. We don't have lots of money, but we have lots of money for regulators. Now, it's funny how that happens. But the Fair Work Commission basically changed the way our sessional staff or casual staff work in the university, just making sure that they have working conditions where they feel valued. And we know that when these people or this group of academics feel as valued and empowered as our research and teaching staff, that they will do a great job with our students and lead to fair and excellent outcomes for our students. How am I going for time? That's 11? 1. Okay. So there are a few things that I thought I'd draw your attention to. Underlying a lot of these issues that we see this need to upskill, reward, and recognise achievements in equity and excellence, not only for our students, but also for our academics, our research staff, our faculty. We know that leadership strategies are guided in part by our competitive landscape, government and philanthropic priorities, but market dynamics continue to be a huge factor in how we redirect efforts at the university. But so much is dependent on this need to invest in faculty development. So providing people with time and space to commit to development, to increase excellence in teaching outcomes, and making sure that people are feeling empowered to make changes. For us, the challenge remains on rebalancing domestic and international student needs, making sure that we're providing excellent opportunities for our students, and also ensuring that we have excellent outcomes for student success for all, not just the privileged. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Hello, good afternoon. I am Dr. Christina Hancock. I'm from the University of Sussex on the south coast of England. But as you might hear in my voice at some points, I actually grew up in Maryland. Went over to an exchange program and slightly never came back. So today I'm really looking forward to sharing you a little bit about some of the structures and systems that we have in England. But first, before we start, I'd like to ask you to be a little bit creative. So hopefully you'll bear with. So using your hands, if you can, I'd like you to try and create a visual representation of the word nucleus. Go on, give it a go. What can you create? Just 10 seconds, very, very quickly. I mean, everybody. Did you do it? Show me, show me, show me. I've got some of this, I've got some of this. Oh, I've got something up in the middle. All right, good. Well done. Right, do you want to see mine? Yeah, give me a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Oh. Do you know what that is? Okay, I'm showing the camera too. That's the B for the Boyer report, okay? It really is. The definition of nucleus from the Oxford Language Dictionary states, the central and most important part of an object, movement, or group, forming the basis for its activity and growth. I'm viewing these the ethos and 11 provocations outlined in the Boyer report as that, the nucleus, okay? The central and most important part for collaboratively creating and higher education environment grounded on the principle of equity, not add-ons, okay, not something that's a side part. So I want to start by highlighting two components that I view as the strengths of the report before I tell you about two structures that we have in the UK. And the definition. So I'm actually going to read that out loud because I feel quite strongly about it. It's provocation 3, facilitating success and eliminating barriers. So what if, alternatively, universities scrutinize their histories, cultures, and structures, enhance what works to open paths to degrees, identify the barriers, and rather than help students over the hurdles, removed the hurdles? We can change inequalities of our own making. In the UK, I do believe there has been a drive for that kind of first level of the identification of barriers for particular groups of young people. Okay, not all right, but it is a start. And I feel like we have to keep pushing this so that it is the full range of students. And I think what's often forgotten, and maybe remind us or remind UERU members, that these barriers change over time, okay? And it requires that ongoing reflexivity to drive the development. We need to listen authentically to our students to understand that lived experience, because these barriers will change. We've got something set right here, right now, but by tomorrow, those barriers are going to change, and we have to constantly be thinking about that. So the other image up there is I felt really drawn to the report. The examples that are in the report, I know that everyone kind of has one on their desk, that are woven throughout the report are exceptional. And one of my confounding challenges that I find in supporting practitioners or colleagues to create, you know, these equitable spaces in education is always linked to, yeah, but how do we do it? What do we do? Okay, do you know what? Some answers are in that book right there, okay? I spent a lot of time looking at some of those examples. And the examples make the Boyer report more than a report, okay? It really does embrace that idea of a blueprint. You know, blueprint shows us the little detail that makes it usable. And I think that that's really what the Boyer report does. It has those necessary details and the concrete examples to serve as that central tool. So I'd like to encourage UERU members also to build on these examples with further dedicated space for student voice, but also from the support teams, looking at kind of that deeper level, that micro level, to be able to explore the provocations, and that will support development. If I just move us forward. I've identified the report as the nucleus, okay? But that key component is the latter part of that definition. So forming the basis for activity and growth. One of the challenges I think the report faces is that we have to be careful not to stay in that utopian, this is what we want. So I was trying to think about, so what next? How do we keep going with this? So therefore, I thought it might be useful to share two examples in the UK that have a role to play. They definitely have a role to play in our direction of travel with pedagogy and practice. Similar to what we were saying about Australia, the UK has a lot of regulatory guidance, policy, structure that guide a lot of our lives. And interesting, when I first arrived in the UK as a young student teacher, I was really struck by how prescriptive things like the national curriculum were, you know, even to the allocation of how much time and the structure of the teaching of literacy. Now, I'm not kind of suggesting anything along those lines, but after 20 plus years of being there, I have come to appreciate their purpose, recognize, most importantly, challenge, okay, their limitations, and see the strengths that they can offer. They have the potential to drive transformation, okay, which can be positive or negative, all right? And I'll just highlight a few of those. So first, this is the TEF, the Teaching Excellence Framework, which sits alongside of our firmly established research excellence framework, which sits alongside our newer knowledge exchange framework. Okay, so we've got these three areas covered, these three frameworks. The TEF was introduced back in 2016 to apparently assess and improve teaching in higher education, to ensure that universities prioritize research and teaching, looking for that balance. At the time, the TEF responded to several concerns from particularly the government regarding higher education sector and how it serves the economy. Institutions' relative performance on qualitative, quantitative, and contextual measures determines their position on a 3-point gold, silver, and bronze scale, and which you can imagine carries significant implications for things like public image and their profile, as well as there's some funding linked to it. So I just want to pause here, okay, because I want to make a note that the focus of this was not on the excellence equity imperative. Can you imagine if it was? And that's where my thinking is, that if the excellence imperative, excellence equity imperative was sat there right at the middle, you'd have that opportunity to move forward. So very quick, what's been the impact? Early views of the TEF. The Universities UK showed that the university leaders were paying attention to the metrics, all right? However, we also saw these really top-down centralized initiatives to get gold ready. But we have this large study from Birmingham City University, over 6,000 higher education staff, which suggested that only 22% identified that there was a positive impact on their teaching and learning. And get this, only 8% who actually said they had any involvement in it, all right? So many academics critique this neoliberal policy metrics as privileging certain outcomes. That most of the metrics, such as destination data, retention, don't actually have anything to do with teaching. And that the only metric that explicitly addresses the teaching quality is the National Student Survey. But this has been shown to have biases in it, sexism and racism. So we've got some concerns there. You know, so I can't stand up here and say, this is the gold standard structure and this is what you do. So I just want to highlight 3 points that I think you can learn from what we've done. First is that any type of structure that we're going to think about for excellence, equity, imperative must be led from a multi-party interest, all right? Not a government-led initiative. So moving away from that independent development to collaborative evaluation, all right? Not a single university, but that collaborative evaluation. Authentic student engagement in development and delivery is really important. Otherwise, you might find out, like we did, that there were boycotting from the student unions that occurred towards some of these surveys. And then most importantly is that the metrics, they have to be accurate in reflecting what you want it to, and recognize really importantly the humanity of external evaluation. The metrics in the UK move the direction of travel, the funding, the time. If the metrics embodied the provocations and was driven by this excellence, equity imperative, then you as academics, as leaders online would have that opportunity to have a structure that supports growth rather than imposing some limitations. So I just want to very briefly mention another framework that we have. I won't spend all day telling you all the frameworks we have, but it does, thinking about it might be helpful in thinking about next steps. So this is a higher education fellowship, higher education academy fellowship, all right? So it is different levels than titles that you get. So you get associate fellow, senior fellow, and principal. It's a nationally and internationally recognized benchmark for teaching excellence in higher education, which is delivered through the United Kingdom Professional Standards Framework. So as you can see, the framework has 3 dimensions: professional values, core knowledge, and areas of activity. Under each of the dimensions over on the right, you can see 5 sets of statements which inform and describe practice in that area. And again, I'm going to take my pause here, okay? because you can clearly see this is not driven by the equity excellence imperative. It's got a few vague connections to equity and a few vague points related to inclusion. What's been the impact of this? Okay, we do have a recent research by Cathcart in 2023, quite a large study that said that there were some positive. People were able to progress in their careers because they get these titles. They started using more innovative methods. They were able to connect with people. However, we have a lot of other research that says it has nothing to do with teaching, and it's merely a bureaucratic process that you need for gaining promotion, which is accurate. Many universities have introduced policies and targets around this, encouraging participation, which effectively making it mandatory. And really interesting, a new paper's come out, so the analysis of the written qualitative reports from the TEF that I was just telling you about, okay, demonstrated that more gold titles were given out to universities who identified higher numbers of staff with these higher level fellowship titles. So this might mean that this trend continues. So what can you learn from us about this? Really, number one, I think really important that you establish a clear correlation with improved teaching, okay? Currently, the awarding body can't demonstrate the direct links to teaching outcomes, which is a problem. Aside from they keep saying that more awards are being given. For the structure to be genuinely supportive, there needs to be an evaluation of the regulation's tangible benefits to learning. Two, the dimensions again, or the criteria, have to be transparent, but slightly more importantly, they need to reflect the current and ongoing changes in values. So, for example, in the most recent iteration of this framework, there was an exclusion after much debate of education for sustainable development. So therefore, in the new version, it's not in there, all right? So we're not pushing that agenda. The process is also completely retrospective and it's individual, and it doesn't account for any ongoing developments. A useful framework must not be something to overcome, but instead a shared opportunity to build on teaching experience and expertise. So despite these inherent tensions that I've mentioned, I hope the comments encourage you to consider next steps in this. So this, how do we go about doing it? Reflect on systematic challenges and envision potentially a collaborative framework that is centered on the equity excellence imperative, and it moves beyond just accountability. And then I want to bring this to a close with a very simple reminder. My research is also in play and playful pedagogy. So the constant pressure that we have to raise, to adjust, to redefine standards in teaching can feel really challenging and really daunting. But it also brings with it a sense of excitement, okay? A time for innovation, a time to try something new, maybe even something more playful. But it's really a time to welcome that kind of really vulnerable self into the space and consider what could be possible with a truly supportive approach that is centered on the equity excellence imperative. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Karen McCrindle. I am Associate Dean Teaching and Learning and Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Toronto Scarborough. I'm also a linguist. I teach in French and English, and my research background is around Pidgin and Creole languages in the Caribbean. So it's great to be here. And I'm also really happy to follow up on my colleagues' comments, because what I really wanted to talk about here is about implementing and sustaining what we call inclusive excellence at the University of Toronto Scarborough. So I'm going to be making quite a lot of parallels, maybe not even directly to the Boyer report, but really sort of show what happens when you take, a report or a roadmap or a blueprint and actually put it into action. Because really these initiatives need to be about action. That's really what it's all about. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of a background of the University of Toronto Scarborough, where we are putting these initiatives into action. So to situate the University of Toronto Scarborough, or UTSC, we're one of 3 campuses of the University of Toronto, which is the top ranked university in Canada, reputed research intensive institution. UTSC is located in the east end of the city, in the most diverse, culturally diverse inner suburb of the most culturally diverse city in Canada. And we're on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We have about 100,000 students at the University of Toronto, 80,000 undergraduate, about 20,000 graduate. At UTSC, we have 15,000 students. Over 14,000 of them are undergraduate students. So we are primarily an undergraduate institution. In terms of our student makeup, we have 31% international students, with 88 different countries of citizenship represented, and the 69% domestic students that we have are from diverse backgrounds as well. So when we talk about our domestic students, it's not a homogeneous kind of pool of students. 48% of our incoming class received scholarships this year, so we are a campus of high achievers as well. And program enrollment is our primary source of revenue, so enrollment and student retention are really important factors for our campus. In Canada, we don't have a roadmap or a blueprint like the Boyer report. Equity work is undertaken at individual institutions, and sometimes, but not often enough, shared through collaborative efforts. At the University of Toronto, we have a stated commitment to cultivating inclusivity and belonging for all members of our community. At U of T, we have an array of institutional documents that address equity and diversity. We have offices promoting and supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have many workplace policies and statements which reflect our commitment to equity and diversity. We've had numerous task forces and working groups, like the Institutional Anti-Black Racism Task Force and the Anti-Asian Task Force. We've had a steering committee for the University of Toronto's response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, who developed a document answering calls to action and the necessity of building a new relationship with Indigenous communities. So there's lots going on. In hiring, we've got unconscious bias modules with regards to elevating teaching excellence as a principal marker of institutional excellence, as mentioned in the Boyer report. At U of T, we do have a professorial stream focused on teaching with 3 ranks: assistant, associate, and full professor teaching stream. So there's a strong institutional commitment and a great deal of work happening centrally and all over the university. And yet we remain an institution where privilege and equity continue, or inequity continue to make their way into the council chambers, the hallways, and the classrooms. It does improve within local contexts, however, and with, I dare say, a UTSC embodying more of what the institution as a whole endeavors to achieve than most other divisions. So what's different about UTSC? First, as I mentioned earlier, we're a diverse campus in a diverse part of the city, and we're used to learning from one another. You know, that's sort of just fundamental on our campus, and that helps a lot when you're doing this kind of work. We're a progressive, forward-thinking campus, and it's a campus that attracts and supports leaders and community members who have a social conscience, an intercultural perspective, a global outlook, and a commitment to the communities that sustain them. So within the university, our campus has developed its own identity. And we've also made great progress in diversifying our faculty and staff complements. We've had programs, equity type programs in place for really quite a long time. But clearly there was far more we could be doing to advance equity and inclusion on our campus. And in 2018, with new campus leadership, we embarked on a strategic planning process. Really, I'm just giving you some links. We embarked on a strategic planning process from 2020 to 2025 called Inspiring Inclusive Excellence, which we're now carrying forward to 2030. It's my 25th year at the university, and this strategic planning process was really unlike any other strategic planning process I had taken part in. There were 8 working groups, multiple sub-working groups, each with representation from faculty, students, staff, and community members. There was a lengthy consultation process, regular town halls, reports from each working group, and new working groups struck as recommended by those groups. Across the campus, the main topic of conversation and principal focus of most of our meetings was this new emerging strategic plan. The more we talked, the more gaps we discovered in our campus and the more work there was to do. It also became evident that equity work was most meaningful when our entire community was inspired to engage. And what was interesting, still interests me about the UTSC strategic plan is that they weren't top-down directives. It was our principal who brought the principles of inclusive excellence to our campus. But the directives, they weren't directives that the community didn't buy into. Engaging the campus community in the process was the top priority of our most senior leader at the campus, and people embraced it. Not everyone, of course, but enough people that it became a priority across the campus. All this to say that when our strat plan process launched, we were open to it and we were ready for it. I don't think we knew how much work it would be because many of us thought we were already further along than we actually were. But we acknowledged we needed to evolve to enable the talented members of our community to develop to their fullest potential. And we could see that that wasn't yet happening. So this process led to a comprehensive and intentional set of commitments that were articulated really quite clearly for the campus. One of the main commitments was to embed our values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accountable leadership into our teaching, learning, scholarship, daily routines, and structures. And in fact, for me, it really, those last two, daily routines and structures, are key because it means that we were putting it into everything that we do every day, all day long, right? The commitments were also set by, are guided by a set of principles: intentional inclusion, students as partners, and students participated all the way through in this process. Reciprocity, particularly important with our Indigenous communities, and accountable leadership. So one of the strategic plans, or one of the strategic directions of the plan, was to undertake comprehensive curriculum renewal that builds upon our teaching and supports for inclusive teaching and learning. And the review was launched in the fall of 2020. This, what you see in the picture on the right, is the report that we brought out in 2022. But it was launched in 2020 with a focus on Indigenous knowledges and knowledge systems, Black knowledges, racialized perspectives, and international and intercultural perspectives. And the review prioritized an intersectional approach, recognizing that individuals hold multiple identities that shape experiences of oppression, including gender, sexuality, and disability. So the curriculum review was collectively led by a working circle made up of students, faculty, librarians, staff, community partners, and they all brought their own perspectives and experiences to the process. We spent the first couple of weeks in meetings talking just about those experiences. So we were sharing them with each other and learning about, who the people were that we were engaging with. The working circle met regularly for a year and a half before starting to draft the report. And in 2022, a report emerged, which you see the title there, or the front of it, with 56 recommended actions. So they were published, and we have been working, through that process and since to implement them. And so I wanted to just share with you some of the recommendations that we've been able to implement so far. So we've developed the Pedagogies of Inclusive Excellence, which is a new grants program that advances equity-based, holistic, accessible, anti-racist, and anti-colonial pedagogies and curriculum development, with particular attention to Indigenous knowledges and knowledge systems, Black knowledges, racialized perspectives, and international and intercultural perspectives. For previously existing grants, we added criteria that a special priority would be given to applications focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion. We've developed a resource hub with a website, basically, which offers a lot of equity-based, inclusive, anti-racist, etc. Resources. And, NRCTL has been directly involved by producing various kinds of resources. So for example, one that I've worked on directly myself was one about navigating microaggressions in the classroom. Another was on teaching sensitive materials. And that latter one is actually an excellent starting point for inclusive course development, because it outlines 10 self-reflective questions for when instructors are preparing to teach a course, to encourage a greater sense of inclusion of voices and perspectives that have been historically marginalized in the university. We've hired 2 of the 3 educational developers recommended by the curriculum review, focused on anti-racist pedagogies, the other on UDL. We also have a shared assistive technology consultant position. We share it with the Accessibility Services Office. We've also developed an 8-month best practices course for appointed faculty, which has significant content around inclusive pedagogies. We've revised our teaching awards criteria and have included a commitment to inclusive excellence in teaching and learning as a key part of our teaching awards, and recent award winners excel in the area and are now a model to others. So we're doing all kinds of things at our campus, and I've got actually really long list here, and we'd be here all day. What's great, though, for me, even preparing for this talk today and to be here, is that it gave me the opportunity to go through our strategic planning process again and think about, what was that like? Also the working circle experience, because I was a member of both of those processes. And, it was hard work. We were really tired, right? And there would be times after those working circle meetings, which were 3 hours long, when they were always on a Friday from 2 to 5, because it was the only time you could fit them into our calendars. And I would go home and my head would be just spinning all night, Friday night, about all the things we talked about and all the things that we could do, should do, and will do. And we are doing, many of them now. And so, I think time-wise, we're good. Yeah. So I think ultimately what I'll say is that action is where it's at, right? You know, we've all seen lots of task force reports and you know, documents that get shelved. What we need to be doing with the Boyer report and with any other kind of blueprint or report that is based in equity is that we need to put it into action in every corner of our campus. As the Boyer report states, it's a collective responsibility. So it's not enough to inspire inclusive excellence or to inspire the equity excellence imperative. Only by sharing the responsibility at the local level will we see transformative and sustainable change. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Okay. So now we're gonna do something really complicated. We're momentarily going to invite you to ask the panelists questions. I'll just mention a couple things that really stood out for me. We're also going to be using one microphone, both for you and for the panelists. So I'm going to run around and get some more steps. I was really struck in Angela's talk in particular. I have been writing and thinking a lot about the degree to which we are entering an era of much greater accountability from outside our institutions, in particularly public higher education in the US, and accountability of so many different kinds. And when I write about this accountability, I try not to jump to judge it because I think some of these kinds of accountability are salutary and some of them are not so salutary. But if you're at an institution that's never been asked to account for its outcomes before, it can be good for someone to say, hey, we expect X outcomes from you. So that's a way of saying that there's something here, I think, that we could talk about how much of this activity really can just come from our own institutions without any external pressures. You know, I was thinking, Karen, during your talk about the fact that, like, I built a teaching center and we did every single one of those things that you just described. And yet we still have really significant equity gaps. And so some of the question of removing the hurdles, which I really appreciated from your talk, Christina, I think one of the things I'm trying to figure out is, like, what does it really mean to remove the hurdles? And is it a matter of changing individual practice and reforming the curriculum? Or is there something else that we're sort of not seeing? And then finally, just to say, like, that the individual versus collective is something that we've been talking about a lot in AAU institutions in particular, and at UERU, thinking more about accountability at the department level than the level of individual faculty members' practice. So how do we think about accountability in a way that de-individualizes and maybe even depersonalizes it a little bit? Because I've been in this conversation now for more than a decade, and I still hear a lot about how individual faculty members need to think differently about their teaching. And I'm like, that's not going to get us there. That's necessary, but it is certainly not sufficient. So with that, I will invite anyone to ask a question or make a comment. And I think we have a monitor for the chat. If anyone in our online group would like to ask a question, we could try to make you sound like something out of a scary movie, or you could type your question into the chat and our colleague from Pod can read it out. Don't be shy. Yes. Thank you for not being shy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Graham. I work at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. I'm a post-baccalaureate fellow and a program coordinator of a pedagogical partnership program. I was just curious, especially I work with students and a lot of their insights come from classroom observations, but specifically, how involved are students in this plan? I know obviously it's about and for them, but are you all approaching them with the work that you're doing? And how involved are they in terms of the information that's being communicated to them? Are they being, informed that, you're thinking about how equity occurs across your universities and your various contexts? I was just curious about how involved the student perspective is.
What a great question. You talked about that.
Is that okay? Yeah. I think the students in the UK are very involved. We have a national student union, which is very active and very involved in any type of initiative that's coming forward. And that sits on our campus too. And students have that voice. And what I would say is they have that voice, but I would question, and I'm not saying just my university, how much we are actively listening to hear. Would be the question that I would ask. So I think that they do have the voice, and we do give them lots of opportunity to share. We do survey after survey after survey. But I'd question if we're really actively listening to them.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have as well at the University of Toronto and at our campus, there's student unions. And I think largely those bodies have existed to kind of, advocate for things that are, that the administration is not supportive of. With our process around, for the strategic plan and the curriculum review, we actively brought students into those processes. So there was a student member, at least one, usually an undergraduate and a graduate student on each of the working groups and each of the sub-working groups of both the strat plan process and the working circle. We've done things so that, for example, in the teaching awards adjudication committee, there's a student that sits on that. So students are, I think, much more present. One of the things that I didn't have time to speak to in my presentation, but that really struck me about the Boyer report was around student advising and the importance of student advising. And what I would say that really came through from the student voice through those processes is how difficult it is for them to access supports. It's not that the supports are not there. We have a center for everything, right? It's that they have to knock on too many doors to access them, right? Or they knock on one door, but really they really need to go in the other door over there. So we are actively working on trying to bring down silos between the various student support areas so that students can go in one door and they can get everything they need. But that's definitely a work in progress because it's, there are structures in place. What I've been doing and other leaders have been doing is to collaborate with our colleagues across those various student centers and find mechanisms for sharing our work and for having things like if the student shows up here, we may walk them over. They show up at our Center for Teaching and Learning, we may walk them over to accessibility services if we identify that that's actually what they need. So
look, ours is very similar. We have lots of student unions. We have at least 4 different student unions for graduate students, international students, domestic students, undergraduate, postgraduate. They're all represented on our working groups. Anything like assessment reform, strategic initiatives, we have student representation in those. Initiative I took in my own faculty when setting up our teaching and learning centre was making sure that we had student nominated teaching awards. So the students were advocating for their lecturers. They came up with rubrics. They came up with a rigorous process to have their student voice heard. And we ensure that we include those in the faculty awards. So everything is seen as equally important as the student voice. I think we can still do better in terms of the student voice at individual faculty levels or school levels. Centrally though, I think we've exhausted the number of ways we can put students in. But I have to say, sometimes we actually find it difficult to have students put up their hand to be involved in some of these committees. So I think something a little different to those is sometimes we overwhelm them with the number of opportunities and then they disconnect. And again, we over-survey our students to the point that they no longer will reply to those surveys because there are just so many of them. But that's how we involve our students.
One other thing I'll add is that we've also found that it's important to compensate our students in some way for the participation. So whether that be we have a co-curricular record, so there's a record of their participation, a letter that accompanies it, and in some case there's a monetary compensation for their participation on one of these committees or working groups.
Okay, so we have a question from one of our colleagues online, Carol Sabina Sullivan. I'm wondering how a regulatory structure like the TEF impacts engagement in educational development. I'm coming from a context where almost all educational development engagement by faculty is voluntary. And those voluntary engagements do yield the best results in terms of teaching transformation. The very few required programs I've facilitated have been met with much more resistance. I'm wondering what your experience has been if you work in a more regulated context.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't remember the name of who it was. Thank you.
Carol,
Thanks. I mean, I will start by saying that, yes, we have lots of resistance, lots of resistance. And that's why I think for me, it felt really important to tell you about them, because we do have them. But I think that if they're done in a way that is in that supportive way and not being that top-down approach, then I do believe that there is opportunity for them, as you were stating how much you worked to do it together instead of being imposed. And I do think that I really do see value in TEF, the Teaching Excellence Framework, but it has to be designed alongside of our students. They boycotted it and they didn't want us doing it. Okay, so we have to do this together, and I think that there are ways that we all could to work together to do it. And I mean, I couldn't say that I want just UERU to do it. I mean, I've sat in some presentations yesterday where individual universities are doing some absolutely amazing work, and I just thought, that person in room A needs to be sat with person B together, doing it together. We're literally reinventing some wheels in different rooms. And we've got to, whether that's a UERU or whether that's a whole group of people coming together to do that. And I think, how it's great that this international, that we got to kind of give our 2 points about this, because I want to run home and say, let's follow them, because I just see real potential in doing it. But I do agree, if it's done at the top down, we've got resistance, and we do have resistance. That's great.
I do think one of the ways that you can make that work is by having substantial mandatory programming at higher. And that, whether it's a new faculty teaching academy, I was at an international meeting a couple of years ago, and I think it was English universities that when they hire people, they don't teach for the first term, and they go through a mandatory substantial professional development for teaching. So they assume everybody comes in relatively at a level playing field. And I think that's one way to have mandatory training not receive, sorry, I said training, I never say that word, mandatory development, not receive quite as much pushback as if you suddenly tell people in the middle of their careers that they have to go to mandatory pedagogy training, which just doesn't work. I mean, all of you in this room have probably experienced trying to do that. So,
yeah, and just to add, as part of induction, if you want to say, almost everyone at Sussex has to do the fellowship that I was talking about. So everyone has to do that. So everyone is, and it is part of getting through your probation period.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. This will be the last question.
Hi, I'm Molly and I'm from UT Austin. And, I came to this session last year and I had already read the Boyer report, and it felt so corroborating and affirming to see the things that I knew that we needed crafted so beautifully by such an array of scholars that it felt like an anchor. And at the same time, the pod conference last year was where a lot of us in DEI restrictive environments, we're starting to see our partners across the US reach out to us to try to help us figure out how to do the work that we knew needed to be done for our students and our staff and our faculty. That's continuing to grow in our country, and it will continue to grow. And even this year, I'm not allowed to talk about equity on my campus. So it's been really distancing in some ways for me to see my colleagues still getting to lean into the work, and we're in more of a survival mode. And so I just wonder, I know it's a heavy comment to end on, but I loved what you said about collectivity and sort of how we get through these moments as a collective. And I just wondered if there's any thoughts about that and how we use this piece as an anchor, but how we can also see our international partners doing the work and how that might be able to bolster some of the work we're wanting to do here. So many thoughts.
Don't worry, the rest of us in the US will joining you in those circumstances in a matter of weeks. Anyone?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I'll say that we're, the political climate that we're in here, or, you're in here, is felt quite deeply in Canada as well. Former Prime Minister, I was saying this earlier, one of our former Prime Ministers, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in 1969 referred to relations with the US as being like sleeping with the elephant. And, we feel we hear every groan and we feel every twitch, And so, and we have a federal election coming up in the next year, and, things are swinging to the right in Canada as well. And there many of us are really quite concerned. So with that said, I don't want to be, too Pollyanna, and I don't want to be, too utopian, but I feel like the work is more important now than it's ever been. And, we are also facing on our campus, more limited resources for everything, right? So that's why I think that, the work is more important than it's ever been before. We do have some things that are in place currently that will help us to sustain it. But it does mean, I think, certainly at our campus, that those of us who have been doing the work need to continue to do the work. And sometimes we'll do the work quietly, without, celebrating it and announcing it like I am today. There are things that we can do as individuals. I talk in my teaching and learning center all the time. We talk a lot about, the one thing principle, right? It's like, what's the one thing each person can do? What's the one thing I can do as the director of that center? What's the one thing, our educational technology specialist can do? And et cetera, et cetera. So they're not all big things, but the small things collectively do mean a lot. And I don't know. I wish I had more, but that's, I think, a little nugget that I have.
Maybe just a quick follow-up. We found that communities of practice have really helped bringing people together, not only as a support mechanism, but also to share information and to strengthen in numbers. So that may be something useful for you.
Yeah, communities of practice and writing circles too. We have those too.
Yeah, and we can set institutional standards for what we expect our instructional workforce to do. And so there's a place, I'll just leave us with a slight chink of light. There's a place there, right? That we don't have to say equity or diversity. We have to say we expect certain kinds of outcomes, and we're going to drive you towards these outcomes, given that once we enroll students, we should expect them to succeed. And so I think there's something there where it might feel like more accountability in a way that's uncomfortable. It's a way of sort of harnessing accountability and turning it back against itself, I think. So that's just a thought. And Steve wanted the last word.
Folks, our panel and our moderator have literally gone to great lengths to be in Chicago with us. How about a big, warm thank you for them? We're so appreciative. And thank you for being here. We gave you free books. I have free books for them too. Everyone gets free books, okay? Thanks a lot for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thanks to our online guests. Should I stop the show? You got it.